Welcome back to the Security Insights podcast, where best practices of cybersecurity meet the real-world workplace. I'm Chris Goettl, and today joining me is one of our product marketers, Robert Waters. Robert, welcome to the Security Insights podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris, for having me. As you mentioned, my name is Robert Waters. I am on the product marketing team here at Ivanti, and I focus specifically on our security space, our security solutions. So currently, I am the product marketing manager for our newest product here at Ivanti, which is Ivanti Neurons for External Attack Surface Management, or EASM. And I've previously covered mobile threat defense, our whole patch management portfolio, our risk-based solutions like risk-based vulnerability management. So I've had a wide swath of experience during my time here at Ivanti with our various security products.
We've got a really good topic to cover today. I think this goes back to Robert and I have spent a lot of time doing market research on the vulnerability management space, especially risk-based vulnerability management and patching being kind of two of the major things that he and I collaborate on. Recently, the Verizon 2024 Data Breach Investigations Report released. And Robert, I think as you took a look at this, there was a lot of interesting things that came out of this. So let's get into the high level of what we're going to cover today.
Absolutely. Thanks for kicking it off, Chris. So for those who are unfamiliar, the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, or the DBIR, or I think some people call it the DBIR. I know we do. I don't know if that exists outside of our little team, but that's the shorthand we use. I don't know. It's probably not sanctioned by Verizon. But the DBIR is an annual report that Verizon puts out. The 2024 version was actually released on May 1st, so last week at the time of this recording. And since then, you and I have had time to consume the info in the report, and we're excited to talk about it now. So for those who may be unfamiliar, the DBIR covers the latest trends in real-world security incidents and breaches that Verizon has done research on with a number of various partners who contribute data to the report. And the intention of the report is really to help security professionals protect their organizations and help them to evaluate potential updates to their security plans, because things in the security space we know change every year. So that annual report is really helpful in that regard. Copies of the report are actually available at verizon.com/DBIR. If you want to dig in and learn more, it's a detailed report. There's a lot of great info in there. So I highly encourage you to go out and grab a copy and look into that. In the meantime, if you're listening to this podcast, pull it up now, follow along at home, and you might learn a thing or two that we're going to cover today. And before we get into the heart of the conversation, I should just mention really quick that Ivanti is actually a contributor to the report. You can find our logo toward the back of the report along with all the other contributors there. And we're really excited to just be a small part of the tremendous effort that goes into pulling this report together. We've talked to some of the folks at Verizon. We know it's basically a full-time job. So exciting stuff. And with that, I say, let's dive in. And right here, you can see where we're starting is with the cover art from the report. So for those of you following along in an audio-only format, you can't see the slides we're sharing. So quick description is we're effectively looking at a stacked column chart that's stylized to look like a cracked doorway. And the colored bars in the crack of the door represent the different ways that attackers make their way inside, so to speak, make their way inside of an organization. And on this podcast, we're going to concentrate on the top 3 ways that are highlighted in this graphic. The first is credentials, the second is phishing, and the third is exploit vulnerabilities. Chris, any surprise seeing credentials being the primary way attackers initiate a breach? And really by a pretty comfortable margin, we're seeing credentials in that first place slot.
No, I would say that overall, the 3 kind of high level categories they've selected here are spot on with what we typically see in, if you research any of the major incidents that have occurred, it's typically one of these 3 things or a combination of those. So credentials being the first one on here, they are one of the starting points of anything, any type of attack that an attacker is going to do. Mobile devices, one of the top attacks is trying to gain credentials from users or their identity. So whether it's trying to just get their email address, whether it's trying to get a actual credential that they can then try to use to brute force their way in, or even try to replicate once they get into an environment, an attacker is going to grab whatever credentials they can find on the systems they get a foothold on, and they're going to try to use that identity to move laterally throughout the environment. The faster they can get to living off the land tactics, the better off they are, because that lets them stay below the radar for a lot longer. So credentials, they're golden. They're a big part of what makes any attack successful.
100%. And, there are so many ways to prevent these attacks that are launched using credentials today. That's a whole topic unto itself. Every organization has their own, security controls in place around authentication, login, things like that. I know for me personally, outside of work, password manager all day, every day. I couldn't live without it. I couldn't tell you one of my passwords at this point, which I think is the whole point. And,
Right. That's a
a
good
lot.
thing. That if you get some way that somebody's trying to interact with you and get a credential, it's better that you don't know it and you question why somebody would even be asking that than if you knew it and just like responded real quick with it.
100%. So true. Following credentials, when we look at the report, we see that the second most common way attackers initiate a breach is via phishing. Chris, I understand you have a recent experience in this area, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us.
Yeah, our security team did a phenomenal job on their last internal phishing campaign, and I did get hit by it. So it was really designed around a lot of the new ways that threat actors are building their phishing campaigns and the tactics that they're using. It's easy to spot a campaign that's completely outside of your realm of work, right? Oh, hey, I just got an email about something from a vendor that I don't do any business with about something that I really don't care about. I'm going to delete the majority of attempts to do that. There's a good chunk of them that are just spam or, marketing kind of stuff, but any phishing attempts that are in there, I pretty much brush most of those away and never even give them the time of day. What is happening more and more, though, is threat actors are getting enough insider information to be able to craft much more sophisticated campaigns around that. And with generative AI, they're coming out much cleaner and much more well baked as far as like how can they do that. So I could go and select a number of things from a company and have a generative AI, response come out with a, hey, what would you select as the content for an email based on this content? With that, they can get something very credible very quickly, do a little bit of tweaking maybe, but it's now tailored a lot more to an organization, and it doesn't feel like a lot of the other things that we're just going to dismiss. And that's they didn't use generative AI, but our internal test that we had run here recently was very much catered towards topics that it seemed the person sending it knew way too much about things going on in the organization, things that I would have expected. Oh yeah, this is something really happening. It's a question that somebody's actually asking me, or a group that they actually want me to join, or some information they actually want me to open and review. Those are the types of campaigns that are necessary to teach users that not everything coming at us is going to be easily dismissible. And that's how they got me. It was something that actually resonated very well with a project that I was working on, and as soon as I clicked, my brain caught up, and it was obvious. Like, oh crap, this was a phishing campaign, and yeah, a couple of seconds later, I got the email for it. But yeah, second time in my career, I will be 100% open honest right now. Twice in my career, the security team has caught me in an internal phishing campaign. To my knowledge, never in an external phishing campaign. So, knock on wood, we're still good with that track record. But yes.
And I think that just goes to show that it could happen to anyone. It happened to you. You're well versed in these areas and it still got you. And I have to echo your sentiment of kudos to our internal security team. If I'm being fully honest, I got that email as well. I looked at it and I was very intrigued, but something felt just a little off. I did not immediately report it. I saved it in the inbox. I'm like, oh, I got to ask someone about this because is this a group I'm supposed to be in? They were inviting us to a Microsoft project team, I believe. It wasn't until the word got out that it was a phishing email that I went in and reported it myself, and got the kudos for that. But that brings me to the next question: did you report the email after you knew it was a phish?
No, I didn't actually click the report on that after I got the response back. I felt it was already game over, so I did not report that. But if you look at the figure on our next slide here, figure 4, this was out of the Verizon breach report around phishing. This is actually the good news. The silver lining around this is, to your point, Robert, we're getting a lot more people reporting phishing attempts. Whether they clicked or not clicked doesn't matter. But this is more of a focus on saying how many people are actually reporting those phishing attempts if they occurred or if they identified them.
You got it. Yeah. So you get a pass. It was an internal phishing email. The second you clicked it, they already knew. You didn't really have to report it. But for those listening in, again, an audio only format, not watching our video blog or our video podcast, figure 4 phishing email report rate by click status is what we're looking at right now from the DBIR. And what we're seeing is a line graph that shows the percentage of users that reported phishing in simulation engagements every year since 2016 for both users that clicked and did not click links in simulated phishing emails. And what we see is year over year growth for both types of users, from around 4% up to 20% for those who did not click, and starting at 3%, growing to 11% for those who did. Chris, I got to ask, what do you make of this data? It seems to me that users are slowly actually becoming more security conscious.
Yes, absolutely. I think that it's a combination of things. One, I think the diligence around many companies continuing to do cybersecurity training and making that type of training mandatory is good. The other thing is I think it's becoming more of a generational kind of culture indoctrination. Now people have been used to it for so many years. It's becoming more and more commonplace. I think the most encouraging part of this is think about the fact that we're dealing with the human element here. It's it's a lot harder to trick a machine unless you know a way around it. You can circumvent things if you've got a pathway to do so. With humans, though, it's a lot easier to manipulate your way through different barriers that you might run into. So we have to be cognizant of that human element. Here, this is kind of reflecting the fact that organizations have continued to reinforce security training. It's becoming more of a cultural feel in general in the world. But most importantly, I think a number of organizations have embraced encouragement of things like reporting. Even if you clicked on a phishing attempt, they would rather you click and then report it as soon as you realize something went wrong, because that gives your organization a better ability to respond to things. I think a lot of people, in earlier years, were afraid to report something like, oh, they clicked on it, they knew they did wrong, and they couldn't take it back. And now they're just like, maybe nobody will know about it. Right. That type of situation is something that we want to encourage our users to, even if they did click, still report it, because that gives the organization a chance to try to get ahead of the attacker and prevent a larger scale impact from occurring. So this is encouraging in many ways.
Totally. I'm going to use a famous phrase here, which is to err is human, to forgive divine. The human element, it's massive. I think the DBIR states that 68% of breaches involve some sort of human element.
Yeah.
And frankly, it's never going away. Nobody's perfect. But having punitive measures and negative reinforcement when people make a mistake is just going to drive them to try to hide it. People are going to click on phishing emails, phishing text, whatever it is going to happen. But you want them to be security conscious enough to realize they've made a mistake and realize the repercussions of that mistake if it's not corrected. So you want to be positive around reporting, frankly. You don't want to scare people away from doing that, because there's still things you can do even after the link is clicked It's not too late at that point, but you need to know about it.
Yeah.
So moving on from phishing, let's now look closer at the third most popular attack vector in the 2024 Verizon DBIR, which is vulnerability exploits. As you mentioned up front, you and I have worked closely on risk-based vulnerability management, patch management. This is the area that's really closest to our hearts. And Verizon's analysis showed a 180% growth of attacks involving the exploitation of vulnerabilities as the critical path to initiate a breach when compared to previous years. And we're now looking at figure 6 here from the DBIR, which reflects that growth. Chris, as the head of Ivanti's patch management product team, what are your thoughts on the increase?
My first thought is a little bit self-serving. Job security. I mean, like, this has been a huge part of my career for 20 years now. Actually, October this year will be 20 years. So yeah, absolutely, job security. No, joking aside, I think the trends that we're seeing are absolutely matching a lot of what we're seeing elsewhere. So there was a couple of other reports just recently released, one of which I think kind of matches these findings as well. Google's Tag group and Mandiant had teamed up on a collaborative report that just released in the last week or two here as well. In that report, they talked about the fact that last year there were 90, I think it was 96 or so 0-day vulnerabilities that were identified in the market. So vulnerability was actively being exploited before anybody knew that it existed. So that's kind of your worst case scenario. At that point, the attackers already utilizing it in a campaign. Some very notables. I mean, we had some big campaigns happen this last year, like Move It. That was a very large cyber attack that I think many organizations felt the brunt of. And seeing the level of sophistication from a lot of threat actors increasing, the level of nation state involvement increasing, it's just expected that there's going to be fluctuations in this type of the type of tactics being used. I think the 180% increase year over year is definitely startling, but as I look back on the last year and see all the different activities that occurred, the numbers feel right from what we saw.
Yeah, I would have to echo that sentiment. I mean, there were a lot of notable vulnerabilities over the past year. And I'd also have to echo the sentiment of job security in a sick, twisted joke sort of way. But if vulnerabilities somehow ever disappear, then you and I are going to have to do some career planning. But
Yep.
what we're seeing a lot is just a boom in the number of vulnerabilities that are published every year, really every day. It just keeps going up and up. And those who have been in this field for some time know that the difficulty there is you cannot patch every vulnerability. It's operationally infeasible. There's hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities. But also, a lot of the methods that have traditionally been used for prioritization of remediation of those vulnerabilities also pose some problems. So let's look now at figure 19 from the DBIR. One tool that's intended to help organizations prioritize vulnerabilities for remediation is the CISA Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog, the KEV or the KEV, much like the DBIR or the DBIR. Everybody says it a different way, but CISA deems the KEV the authoritative source of vulnerabilities that have been exploited in the wild. However, the DBIR this year shows us that many organizations are failing to remediate the vulnerabilities found in the KEV in a timely fashion. Figure 19, which we're showing on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. If you're listening, Figure 19 from the DBIR is titled Survival Analysis of CISA KEV Vulnerabilities. And one of the big takeaways from this figure is that it shows us that organizations are taking roughly 55 days, almost 2 months, to remediate half of the critical vulnerabilities in the CISA KEV once patches are available. Chris, I got to ask, what's your interpretation of the data in this graph? Why are so many organizations taking so long to remediate these vulnerabilities that are proven to be dangerous?
Yeah, so CISA's KEV list is focused on trying to identify the worst of the worst, the biggest threats from a vulnerability perspective. There's 1,105 CVEs on there as of this morning. I actually downloaded the latest catalog and looked at it. So just over 1,100 vulnerabilities in the current CISA KEV list, all of which are actively being exploited. Now, if you compare this to a larger risk-based vulnerability management platform, so Ivanti's RBVM platform is tracking over 41,000 known exploited vulnerabilities. So CISA is giving you the tip of the iceberg, but the most important ones. I will be honest with that. Like there's the next chart in the report, if you're looking at that, gets into a plot of non-CISA KEV versus CISA KEV CVEs and talks about the trend of the CISA reported ones are the ones that are tend to be more actively being targeted. The other ones, there's still a threat. They're still actively being exploited, and a number of them are actually being used in some decent sized campaigns. But it's CISA's goal here is trying to give the masses, the public, the general industry a fighting chance. This is the risk-based vulnerability management strategy if you don't have budget to go after a full productized platform level RBVM implementation. You should at least be doing CISA KEV. So looking at this a little bit further and getting into the, hey, why are we seeing, like, I really liked the 50% kind of barrier in there because that actually matches some very distinctive information. If you filter the CISA KEV list and take out network appliances and other types of devices like IP phones and things like that, devices that are more complicated to update, take those aside for a moment. Take out development stacks and major like business applications within your organization. Things like struts and uh, CRM solutions and ERP solutions, like those types of platforms. Let's take all of that out for a second and say, out of this list of 1,100 CVEs, what is the most easily resolved, the low hanging fruit? And when you do that, you get down to roughly 50% of that list. Now, what I would say is what we're seeing, if you look at the first breakpoint, 85% of vulnerabilities unremediated. So we've gotten 15 of them, 15% of the vulnerabilities remediated by about 30 days. Those are the low hanging fruit. That's going to be your OS, probably the browsers. If you take the Microsoft, Apple, iOS, and other OS related stuff like that, and very simple ones like the applications like an Adobe Reader, Outlook, browsers, take those out first. That's probably roughly 15-ish% of what's in the CISA KEV list. So the simple stuff is done. All right, now we get into the stuff that takes us a little bit more time. More complicated updates like .NET Framework or things like that can be updated, but they're going to take a little bit more time and planning. Exchange updates, SQL updates. So that gets us up to that 50% mark. The remainder now are application or devices, appliances, major platforms, development vulnerabilities that, like Log4j was one of the CISA KEV list vulnerabilities. It's going to take time for all the different vendors to update Log4j and then for you to go and update all of those vendors. So that's where things start to taper off into this long tail out there. Now, what CISA KEV's report analysis doesn't show, though, is organizations who are security minded, if they have those vulnerabilities hanging out there for longer, they should be supplementing it with additional mitigation. Log4j, most organizations went and resolved the immediate security threat by removing the Log4j library from a number of their products in their environment. Yes, they lost some visibility into logging, but at the same time, they reduced the risk. Print Nightmare was another good example. People were able to turn off the print spooler before the patch was available to mitigate that risk. So if I were to go and dig deeper into this, I would expect a number of organizations, when we get into those longer tail vulnerabilities, are supplementing with additional mitigations. But this does show us that the overall management of vulnerabilities across our environment is a lot more complex than just going and patching things. This is where in a follow up episode, we're going to dig in a little bit deeper into what it really takes to modernize your vulnerability lifecycle process within your environment. It involves getting your DevOps team integrated into the vulnerability management program. It involves getting the business line teams. If there's a team responsible for a business application that has a vulnerability, that needs to be updated. You need to be able to route that work to the right team and get them aware of it and working towards that project. They should be able to track what mitigations have been put in place and what the long-term plan is for resolution. And you need business level visibility into all those things. So we're going to get into a deeper level of that in a follow-up episode. And we're also going to get into the talking about credentials and phishing again for just a second. We're going to do another follow-up episode getting into some of the technologies and capabilities that you can do to help mitigate risk around those two areas.
You got it. Yeah, I think you're spot on with all those points. And like you said, we're going to do some follow-up episodes because we're running up on time here, but there's so much more to dive into on these topics. We are really just getting to the start of it. This is important stuff. What are the issues? But the real important part is how do we prevent them? How do we protect our organizations from falling victim to these issues? So with that, I'll throw it back to you and let you take us home.
All right. Thanks, Robert. And thank you all for joining us here on the Security Insights podcast. As always, feel free to share this episode if you liked it and share it with others who may find some value in that. Like Robert said, we're going to be back with some additional episodes showing you how to protect yourself against these types of threats. Exploiting vulnerabilities as another episode, and then another one that will get into credentials and phishing around. So be sure to subscribe and come on back for our next episode. Until then, have a great day.